stress, depression, anxiety.
Okay, everybody ready? You good, guys? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, we have very good news for the children of New York City and for the parents in New York City. Mayoral control of education has been extended for the next 2 years. This is a hugely important moment. We have 1.1 million school children in this city and millions of family members who care deeply about those children. No one knew until just a couple hours ago where this was going. The good news is Albany's done the right thing. It took a lot of work, a lot of dialogue, a lot of negotiation, but Albany's done the right thing by our children. Let's be clear, we got to a point where we were standing on the brink, only about 36 hours before the deadline, and mayoral control could have lapsed. But again, all the hard work came to fruition, and this crisis was averted. In the end, Albany chose equity and excellence over chaos and corruption. I've used those phrases to describe the old reality of the 32 school boards. Chaos and corruption was literally what we experienced for years and years in this city, and it held us back and obviously made it impossible for our schools to improve. The 15 years since mayoral control of education has been in place, we've seen almost a 50% improvement in our graduation rate. We've seen steep declines in our dropout rate. We've seen great improvements in our test scores. It's clear that mayoral control has been a success. And the action by the legislature and the governor today show that that old history of chaos and corruption has been rejected once again. Now we will be focusing and redoubling our efforts on our equity and excellence agenda, which I believe fundamentally has helped move our school system forward. And for the next 2 years, we will not have the distraction of another vote in Albany. We will have our attention squarely on our children and on improving their education every single day. It's time to offer some thanks because all of the key leaders in Albany contributed to this outcome. And as you know, I've been talking to the leadership in Albany constantly over the last couple of weeks. The conversations were very productive. Sometimes there were clearly disagreements, there were ups and downs, but they were ultimately very productive, respectful, open conversations that helped us get to a good outcome. I want to thank Governor Cuomo for his leadership in this process. I want to thank Speaker Hasty and affirm once again that the State Assembly stood by us every step along the way. I want to thank Leader Flanagan. We had a series of good and respectful conversations that I think were important in this process. I want to thank Leader Stewart-Cousins and Leader Klein as well for their important roles. And I have to give real credit to key members of the City Hall team who took up residency in Albany over the last couple of weeks. Emma Wolf, my Director of Intergovernmental Affairs, Dean Fullahan, our Budget Director, and Sharif Solomon, our State Legislative Director. All of them deserve tremendous credit for working with all of the parties to get to a positive resolution. Look, I think the voices of the people mattered a lot here, the voices of leaders of every sector of New York City. A lot of you were here when we pulled together a group of business leaders and 105 CEOs who signed a letter in support of mayoral control. A lot of you were here days later when we had some of the most important labor leaders and labor organizations in the city standing in common cause in favor of mayoral control. We've had faith leaders speak up, civic leaders speak up. There's a very strong leadership consensus in this city on the need to continue mayoral control as a way forward for our schools. There's a lot more we have to do to fix our schools. I'm quite clear about that. But it only will happen with mayoral control of education. And to have this clear path forward now for the next 2 years is extremely helpful in that effort to constantly improve our schools. So I want to thank all those leaders who stepped up, and they did it over and over again. and their commitment made a big difference here. Their voices were definitely heard in Albany, I can tell you that for a fact. Finally, just to say, this is, for me personally, also a very important moment. I'm a parent. My two children, Kiara and Dante, went through the public schools the whole way through their education. They benefited from the changes that came from mayoral control. I want for other children what I wanted for my own. I want to see them get the education they deserve. And we're going to work with all elements of the educational system as we have throughout. We'll work with traditional public schools and charter schools. We'll work with Catholic schools and Jewish schools and Muslim schools, as we have on pre-K, as we have on after school. We'll keep doing that for the good of all. But as I've said many times, the key determinant of our future will be our traditional public schools. This gives us the opportunity to continue making the changes we need to reach over 1.1 million kids. Finally, we've looked at what it takes to change the status quo in the school system. And we've undertaken a plan that I think has been systematic. First, addressing early child education with pre-K and now 3K to come. And this obviously is a great day also because it's going to speed the development of our 3K initiative. This vote in Albany opens the door to us moving forward aggressively on 3K. It's the equity and excellence agenda, including things like the focus on getting kids reading on third grade level in much, much greater numbers. It's a focus on computer science for all. It's a focus on access to college, including AP classes in every high school. That's what this agenda has been about, piece by piece. It's been growing steadily. Now it will take off even more. So I'm really ready to get back to work, focusing on the day-to-day work of our schools. We just completed school this week, but in about 10 weeks' time, we'll be opening up again. So we got a lot of work to do over the summer to get ready for an even stronger school year next year. And just a few words in Spanish before I take your questions. I'll take questions on the mayoral control of education issue and everything in Albany, and then we'll turn to any and all other topics. But first in Spanish. Hoy logramos una gran victoria para más de 1 millón de niños y sus familias. El gobierno estatal ha hecho lo correcto. Extender el control escolar de la alcaldía por 2 años. Ahora podemos seguir luchando por la equidad y la excelencia para todos nuestros niños. With that, welcome your questions.
Mr. Mayor, can you just tell us a little bit about what the mood was when you found out in City Hall? Did you pop champagne? And particularly given the fact that you won't have to go through this next year.
That is worthy of a party, Mara. You all watched this process. We thought last Wednesday we were really, really close. And there were points in the day yesterday we thought were really, really close. And I think what makes it a little hard to have the classic celebration is because the thing was sort of on again, off again several times. But it was an incredible feeling of relief when we finally got the news. And, the way that a consensus builds is a pretty fascinating thing and never quite the same each time. But as this day progressed, it looked more and more hopeful. And then I finally got the word that the Senate had begun voting, and that was an incredible sense of relief. Yeah.
What role did Governor Cuomo play in this?
He played an important role, and I think a very constructive role. We had a number of conversations over the last few weeks. And I think, given the complexity of all the issues, you saw issues kind of come on and off the table throughout this process. The final outcome was quite a substantial number of issues coming together, but that didn't look like it would be the case even 48 hours ago. So there was a lot that had to be balanced in the equation. I think the governor played a very helpful role in terms of continuing to both figure out what each party needed, but also push them towards resolution. Yeah.
You mentioned the word distraction. Can you talk about what you and your team maybe couldn't do or had less time to focus on in the last few weeks as you basically spent every single day working on this, especially in the backdrop of, right, everyone basically agrees with the governance system of Mayoral?
How ironical. So Look, the last few weeks have been typified by a dual reality, a huge amount of time going into mayoral control education, a huge amount of time going into trying to stop the U.S. Senate healthcare bill. These are two things that would have had immensely, the end of mayoral control and the passage of the current Senate healthcare legislation. Both of those would have had really, really negative impact on millions of New Yorkers. So that's been a dual focus, intensive focus, literally every single day, many hours per day. When a situation is averted like this, and now we know we have mayoral control for 2 more years, it opens up a lot more time and space to focus on the bigger picture issues up ahead in terms of how we have to keep moving our school system. There's lots we want to work on to improve the schools. This now gives us both the time and energy to focus more, but also the clarity in terms of having the ability to make longer-term plans. So that's incredibly helpful. There's going to be times in government where there's a challenge that's going to take time away from the central agenda. This was a long process, as you saw, so it took a lot of time. But it's very liberating to have it behind us, so now we can get back to the core agenda. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, can you explain a little bit of your understanding as to how the charter school trade-off got dropped from this that the Senate was seeking? And secondly, it seems like that was replaced by this pension increase measure. Can you talk about that and the impact that might have on the city?
Sure. Look, Speaker Hastie said from the beginning, and I thought it was a very fair concept, that mayoral control should be seen in its own light, and that it should be just as automatic as in other words, extending mayoral control should be just as automatic as extending taxing authority for upstate counties or for the city of New York. I think it was a very fair construct. I think it was a very helpful one, too, and I think it had a big impact on the outcome. So eventually, I think that logic pervaded in many ways. And yeah, it was perfectly fair to say, let's look at other things that could be important to the different parties and that would be fair to include in an omnibus bill. Ultimately, the pension item I thought was fair. The idea behind it was to be considerate of our uniform officers who stay on the job beyond the minimum number of years, and to respect their reality, particularly if they become disabled. The cost was reasonable. It was not something we thought was unfair. I'm always sensitive to adding to pension burdens because that's a big long-term issue, but this was a modest cost and a fair concept. So I think that also was an important part of getting to a better outcome.
Do you have that cost? Do you know what that cost is?
I'll have our folks tell you, but again, modest in the scheme of things.
On the charter aspect, is that something where, was that renewed as part of the conversation, or the Senate just backed down?
I won't speak for any of the other parties. I think we had very constructive conversations. And, Leader Flanagan and I have spoken over the last couple of years off and on, but we had our most extensive conversations in the last 2 weeks of that whole time frame since he became leader. And I think we found some real common ground in terms of the ability to work together on specific ideas. So he raised real concerns about charter schools. I showed him, some of the history that I think was good for him to be aware of, that we had included charters proactively in the pre-K effort. We intended to in 3K. We had already with the after-school effort, and that we were working with any number of charter schools every single day in a constructive manner. He raised various concerns. We've been working on those concerns with him. So I think that was a helpful piece of the equation as well. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, this is obviously a day of celebration, but looking at this from the perspective of a New Yorker who saw 4 men in a room negotiating a deal that they had an entire session to work out, I'm wondering if you could comment at all on the process, and then I have a follow-up question.
Look, we understand that legislatures in general are driven by deadlines, and no place more than Albany. So what we saw this year was not that different in the final analysis than we've seen for decades. The one difference that was a real concern was when we got to Wednesday and the official end of the session, we didn't see the traditional, we'll extend a few days or whatever. It looked much more tentative, that maybe people would not be coming back. But the dialogue always continued. I want to be fair to everyone. The dialogue never ceased, literally from Wednesday night into Thursday and every day after. So it's for all of us. It's tough when you know a deadline's coming and you understand the ramifications of it. We got down to 36 hours out. That's going to cause some concern. But it would have been a lot worse if there was a breakdown in communication, and that did not occur. Everyone kept talking to everyone. Wasn't always, total agreement. Wasn't always sweetness and light, but everyone kept talking to everyone. And literally, everyone was talking to everyone. And I think that's what always gave me hope that ball game wasn't over till it was over.
Is there anything about it that has changed your view of Governor Cuomo?
Look, I don't want to get into personalities in a moment where we should be focused on our kids. I can say broadly that I've known the governor, since 1995. I've had a lot of experience working with him. He did some good work here. He did some important work, and I appreciate it. And it was a good dialogue. And I've said many, many times, when the governor does something to help New York City, I'm going to praise him and thank him. So I'm here to praise him and thank him. He did something very helpful. And like all mayors, if we disagree with the governor and think something isn't helping New York, it's my job to say that too. But this was a good effort, and we got to a good place. We get someone who hasn't gone, David.
Picking up on that, Mr. Mayor, how much was it part of your strategy to pull your punches in terms of, with Senator Flanagan and also with the governor as the negotiations were, seemed to be not moving forward? And, is it appropriate to read into this a détente in this sort of running feud that you've had with the governor?
It's not a day to assess bigger structural relationships with the different players in Albany. It really isn't. We're talking about something very specific here. We had a good opportunity to work together and get something done. I'm very happy about that. Anyone who's working with me, I'm working with them. That's the way I think about it. And look, John Flanagan and I are from different parties, and we obviously disagree on many things, but he was consistently accessible. The conversations were very respectful and substantial. And I think we found we could work together, even though there was going to be differences, right? So to your original part of the question, I'm always going to try and have an open hand if I think people are working in a way that's respectful of New York City's needs and productive for New York City, and that's what I saw here.
On the charter, were there any side agreements not in the legislation that involved the city education department doing anything with regard to charters?
There were a lot of conversations about a set of issues related to charters that we believed could be handled administratively. Those ideas are being crystallized into a final form. There's still some finishing touches to put on. There will be an upcoming announcement on that.
Can you elaborate with regard to the zombie charters?
Again, I'm not going to go into the specifics because I want to respect that all the parties have to finish the final touches, as I said. But there are, again, very productive conversations about things where we could work together. I thought a number of the issues that were raised were perfectly fair. Were respectful of what the city was trying to do overall in terms of education. Were not onerous. There were ways we could work together. And that was part of what I think energized this process, was the more we talked about actual substance. And we said, well, wait a minute, we could work together on that. Let's see if we can solve that. The Speaker was very clear about not wanting to address those issues legislatively, which I, again, think was a fair approach given the sanctity of mayoral control of education. That didn't mean we couldn't look at other ways to address the issues. So again, I believe you'll see very soon some final outcomes on that. Yes?
There's obviously a lot of efforts to drum up public pressure. How much do you think that played a role in this? It's every year this year was more intense because it got down more to the wire, but it's feeling a little bit almost like Groundhog Day with this happening. How much did the public pressure?
I think it mattered a lot. I don't think it's Groundhog Day because really every year has been a little different. And obviously this year proved that we could break out of the cycle of the last 2 years, which is very good for New York City and very good for our kids. And I think this proves the point that now there's no assumption about the future, that in the future we can have a better conversation and certainly look at the potential of longer-term extensions. But I think the pressure was deeply felt. Look, as was referenced earlier, there's not a single person up in Albany certainly not among the leaders saying they have another kind of governance system they prefer. They were all hearing from business leaders, from labor leaders, from all sorts of folks saying, don't let this go over the cliff. And that was quite clear. I think it weighed on them. And I also would say at the same time, I think they, to their credit, started looking for creative solutions, which is what you'd like to see in a legislative process. I mean, there were some difficult moments along the way, but if I think back over the last 2 weeks, I'd say, you know what, there were a lot of really good conversations. There were a lot of respectful conversations. There were a lot of creative conversations. There was much more dialogue than we've had in the last few years. And I think it was productive. I think the final bill addresses concerns from all over the state, from each part of the leadership in Albany. And I think that's a good outcome. I think that's actually in some way reassuring. Yeah.
What was the deciding factor in giving you 2 years rather than 1 year? You've been getting 1 year.
I think the constant pressure. I mean, again, let's summarize. All of the editorial boards had weighed in favor of mayoral control of education. 105 CEOs, New York City Partnership, the Real Estate Board in New York City, the vast majority of the major labor unions. I mean, again, when do you see that in New York City? Like, we can't agree on anything around here, right? So when do you see that level of consensus? It was more energetic this year. I really believe that. There was more urgency as time went by because in the preceding years we didn't get quite so close to the edge. There was certainly a stronger voice from labor this time around. No, I think each year has been different. And everyone understood that this year things started a lot later than anything we've seen previously. We all have talked about that before. I mean, a really late start. And I think that actually energized a lot of concern. So I think the 2 year in part came from the level of concern and the recognition that mayoral control actually does work. Unlike in the past years also, we have more of a track record. Look, let's put aside partisanship, let's put aside personalities. In 2015, in the spring, I was still a very unknown quantity. Chancellor Farina was still very new. We're talking about now, it's been 3.5 years since we got here. I think that does affect the equation. So there's a lot of things that opened up the door to 2 years, and obviously the bigger the discussion got and more items got put on the table, that was helpful too, and that's, again, what you want in a good legislative process. Yes?
A couple big items you didn't get any movement on, design build and the speed cameras.
Yeah.
Can you speak to those? And especially on the speed cameras, it seems like Senator Felder was a major holdup there. Did you have any conversations with him?
I have spoken to Senator Felder, I've spoken to Senator Lanza, I've obviously spoken to Senator Flanagan. Look, I get that speed cameras to some are unpalatable and are not politically easy, but they save lives. They save children's lives, they save the lives of seniors in particular. And the right thing to do would have been to have the speed cameras in there. But I get that it wasn't an easy lift. We're not going to give up. And certainly the families who have lost loved ones are not going to give up. So I'm very disappointed. It will simply cause us to redouble all of our other Vision Zero efforts. You're going to still see a lot more enforcement by the NYPD, continued improvement in traffic designs, all sorts of other things. And then we'll be right back in Albany to work for more speed cameras. So I'm not shocked, given that we always knew it was not politically easy. But I'm disappointed. Design build is a variation on that too, an opportunity to save ultimately billions of dollars for city taxpayers, something that would have been really fair because the state gives itself some of those same rights and flexibility. Look, I think the consciousness on this one's growing in Albany, and as I talk to the leaders about it, I think its day will come, or at least we'll make more progress going forward. I was very heartened on a separate front, but with similar realities, the MWBE bill, which, a couple months ago everyone said there was not a chance in the world. We end up with a very substantial improvement in our ability to provide contracts to MWBEs, and once again to address the issue of the state giving itself certain rights that it didn't give the city. So that's a good sign of some of those contradictions being addressed. Hopefully next time that will be true for design build as well.
You talked about the healthcare bill, it's sort of, children are gonna die because of it if it goes through. Would you say that the lack of speed camera expansion, children are gonna die because you weren't granted that power?
There's always a danger. There's no question about it. There's always a danger that if we don't have more speed cameras, it puts children in schools that don't have speed cameras at risk. But we will try with everything we have to compensate with more police presence, as I said, more enforcement, changing street designs. And this is a long battle. I mean, Vision Zero is based on changing behavior fundamentally. We're going to be at this a long time. So once again, sometimes, the city has to use all of our tools with great intensity when we don't get the help we need from Albany or from Washington. This is one of those times. Yeah.
Mayor, is there anything you could tell us about your relationship with Senator Felder? And we have some reports that he was one of the major obstacles last week when the deal that was there fell apart and he was asking for these armed police officers at schools. You were willing at one point to give some. Can you tell us anything about your relationship with the senator? You both served in the council.
Sure.
And how influential was he during these last few days in making things more difficult or more?
So I've known him for well over 15 years, and I spoke to him as recently as this morning, and we work together. We obviously have had some times when we agree a lot and other times when we don't, but we've always worked together, and I certainly want to continue to work with him. The 3 Republican senators from New York City are very influential. There's no question about it. And he's a Democrat, but obviously sitting with the Republicans. But, those 3 are very important people in that Republican conference. We work with them on a number of things. Again, there's some areas where we really agree. There's some areas where we don't. But I wouldn't frame it in the negative because we got there in the end. We got to an outcome that we're profoundly comfortable with. I mean, that's the bottom line is, did we get what we wanted? We fundamentally believed that we had to get mayoral control education and that if we could get to multiple years, that was the ideal. We got there. And all the other items, all the give and take, I think was a productive and fair give and take. I'm very comfortable with everything that's in this package. So I think that says in the end the dialogue worked. Yeah.
Are we on to other topics now?
Let's see if there's anything else about Albany related, and then we'll move on. Anything else Albany related? Going once, twice, fire away. What is that?
MTA Albany related.
That's definitional. Go ahead. We'll come back to you. Go ahead.
Just recently, the city of New York entered into a consent decree with the Department of Justice, and it's going to pay out $1.3 million to the Department of Transportation employees who were denied over several years. It goes from like 2007 to 2016, advanced within the civil service, and they were basically harangued with racial epithets all through that period of time. And the president, the last supervisor, who is, you have stipulated in this agreement, was involved with this, is still in the employ of the city of New York.
Let me stop you just for, I'm sorry to interrupt. I literally don't know the details of this, so I just apologize. I am not, and I apologize profusely. Profusely. You and I have known each other a long time, but no, I cannot tell a lie. I do not know the details of the case, but if you let me get up to date, I'll be happy to comment on it. Okay, go ahead, Aaron.
The governor declared a state of emergency for the MTA today. Do you think that will make a difference? And he's also been saying frequently lately that he wants the city again to contribute more to the MTA. In fact, even said the city's contribution should be equal to the state contribution. Is that anything that has a chance of happening?
No. Look, I respect the governor's actions in the last week a lot, and I commend him for them. Naming Joe Lhota was a really good move. Now, just to allow bipartisanship to break out for a minute in the room, I mean, you know, there's a lot of times when you wouldn't expect to be praising your general election opponent from last time. I like Joe Lhota. I've worked with Joe Lhota over many years. I think he's a very capable guy. And we have a fine rapport, which is the other irony in this situation. He and I know how to talk and work together very easily. So he called me the other day, which I really appreciated. We had a good talk. That was an important move. I think the declaration of emergency is a smart move. I think it reflects the reality that New Yorkers are feeling. Everyone's understandably very concerned and frustrated. This speaks to that, which is good. I think the state making a bigger investment is good. I think the review, I think it's 90-day review or 60-day review to figure out what are the short-term actions that can be taken. That's exactly what I've been hoping to see, because I believe there are more short-term actions that can be taken. So all that is right on the money. But this is the state's responsibility. We in the city have a host of things we are responsible for that we don't have enough resources for. We would like to do a lot more affordable housing. We'd like to repave a lot more roads. We'd like to fix a lot more bridges. I go down a whole list. Build more schools more quickly. That's where the city's resources should go. And there's an endless, I go out to town hall meetings, as you know, and people are demanding more and more of those things than they have every right to. That's the city's responsibility. The state has responsibility for the MTA. And the other thing I'm concerned about, I've noted it before, even though I'm gratified the health care bill did not move this week in the Senate, it will be back on the docket in a matter of a week or two. Profoundly dangerous for the city of New York, including for our budget. If well over 1 million New Yorkers lose health insurance and our public hospital system is getting much less revenue as a result, let alone the human cost to all those families, that's going to have an impact on our budget, at least in the hundreds of millions, before you even get to the federal budget proposal, which will play out in September, which could have many hundreds of millions of dollars impact on us. So it's not the time for the city to be going into new veins of spending that are state responsibility. And that's really the combination. It's not our responsibility, and we have to be smart about our resources until we figure out what is going to come out of Washington.
Just to be clear, you're saying you're not going to increase the contribution at all?
Correct.
Staying on the topic of transportation, you've introduced the New York City Ferry, your plans for the BQX. Do you think that these alternatives will actually provide transportation that can put a dent in the overcrowded that's on the subways? I mean, you have, I guess, 500,000 riders last week, but the trains are still overcrowded and it doesn't seem to be affecting the most crowded lines. I mean, you say you don't want to invest more money into the state, what you think is the state's investment, but do you have any other plans to improve transportation for people who are really suffering and can't take a ferry or a streetcar?
Look, there's several points there in the question I appreciate. First of all, the things we're investing in are very modest compared to the extent of the MTA. And I keep reminding people the MTA has a very big budget right now that historically has not been focused enough on the subway system. And this, there's plenty to document this. For years and years and years, this was a big topic. It hasn't been as much in recent years, but for many years, especially when the strap hanger advocacy was a lot bigger in this town, it was a constant discussion about why is so much of the MTA budget going to everything but the subways. That was before we had massive overcrowding in the subways. It should be an even more pertinent topic now. So I think the central point is let's look at, it's a great time to have a reset with the MTA, and I commend the governor. He's put in a great leader. He's doing the declaration of emergency, the review, putting in more money. That's fantastic. It's a great time to figure out how to address the short-term issues, particularly the signal issues, the electrical issues, with the resources the MTA has. And then we can think about the long term. But meanwhile, while the MTA works to try and figure out how to use its extraordinary resources to address this issue, we need to create more alternatives because the current MTA system just isn't enough to cover all the needs. Our alternatives are being created in a very cost-efficient manner. Obviously, City Bike, and I commend Mayor Bloomberg for that, was created in a way that was self-sustaining. The BQX, the light rail, is created in a way that works with the expected revenue that would come from development in that area, as was done with the number 7 train extension. So that's sort of a way of achieving the revenue needed to get something done and create a new and additional service in the process. And then the ferry service is very cost efficient in the scheme of things and a small investment comparatively. But the difference with the ferry service is it has limitless possibility. If it continues to grow the way we're seeing, you can add any number of new routes. You can serve millions and millions of people. I mean, there's tremendous potential here, and it has a great benefit of taking pressure off the subway system.
And no paving.
And what?
No paving.
There you go. No paving, no stoplights, no broken cars in front of you. There's all sorts of broken down cars in front of you. There's so many things. But the point in all that is we have tremendous potential. And that's something we will take full responsibility for in the city of New York. So I want to see where that can go. I'm really impressed. People like it. For a lot of people, it's very convenient. And that's something we'll take full responsibility for. But I think that's right, to explore new options and see how far they can take us while continuing to fix the subway. The other thing is the select bus service, which has actually been a very productive piece of the equation. It's bluntly the least sexy, but it's really big deal in terms of ridership. That's been a partnership with the MTA and the City of New York. We cover a lot of the capital expenses, and they provide the operating expenses. You're going to see more of that, too. And all of that can help take some pressure off the subways. And we know one thing that's for sure. The subways are going to take a lot of renovation. There's going to be lines that are shut in the process, et cetera. We need all those other alternatives for that reason, too.
Mayor, could you clarify for the record why last week you didn't feel it was important enough to visit the site of the derailment?
Sure. When there's any kind of incident, I look at, my staff look at the specific situation. Every one of them is different. Every single one is different. I go somewhere when I think there's something to add, if there's something that is improved by my presence in terms of response, if the people need answers, particularly if it's an ongoing situation, if there's concern about what the incident means. For example, obviously several times where the people of the city needed to know whether something was an act of terror or not, what the status of an investigation was in terms of matters that obviously pertain to life and death. There are a variety of ways you can look at it. There's no two are alike. But in this situation, I got the initial reports. It became clear very quickly the situation was contained. Thank God there were not major injuries. People were being evacuated by the fire department effectively. Chair Loda was on the scene. I know how upsetting it was, of course, to everyone involved, and I know it raised real frustrations about what's going on with the subway system. But the situation was being handled, and handled well, and handled quickly. I thought under that set of circumstances, it was not a place where I was going to add to the equation. And I think the core reality was the situation was being addressed, and addressed effectively.
In hindsight, was it ultimately perhaps a situation where, with negotiations ongoing in Albany, where perhaps you didn't want to take any shots at the MTA, which is state-run?
You know, I would say the other way around. I'm always going to look at a situation that is an urgent situation and decide how to handle it, but I have to also balance it against the other elements of my job. This week, earlier in the week, it was still not clear whether the healthcare bill was moving. We thought it was. A lot of attention was going there. Obviously, mayoral control we were working on literally until 3 hours ago, 2 hours ago. So everything has to be factored. These are decisions that people have to make in this work all the time. I used to, as you know, be on the staff of the mayor's office when I was younger. And, one thing that doesn't change about being mayor of New York City is a huge number of resets and changes during the day as new things emerge. But you have to also think about what's going to serve the greatest number of New Yorkers. And I fundamentally believe that if a situation was being handled properly, that I needed to stay focused on preserving mayoral control education and dealing with the other issues that were occurring in Albany and on other fronts. That was the right decision. I'm comfortable with it.
Is there any thought or planning going into the city creating its own health plan system, its own health insurance system?
It's a very intriguing idea. There is not planning going into it. The idea has been forwarded from time to time. It's certainly worth a look, but I think it's a very, very tough endeavor. I think the practical option is to go and fight to stop this legislation from happening or from being anywhere near as bad as it is in its current form, because that's the way to serve the most people most quickly, in a way that we can ensure works, because we have an imperfect system, but we at least can make sure it works for a lot of people. I think if we got a really, really bad result out of Washington, we'd have to look at any and all options at that point, because you're talking about, again, our estimates of up to 1.6 million New Yorkers could lose insurance under the current Senate bill. But has there been any serious consideration? No. I don't want to give you the wrong impression. Yes?
Well, certainly Godfrey has been long working for a single-payer thing.
At the state level.
Right.
Right. And he's right about that.
Right. It looks like New York City with very robust public health system has, is that you're kind of theoretically in a better position, theoretically, than other states because of the significance of New York City.
The problem, I'm not a lawyer, but the problem to me is the legal construct, that regulation of healthcare is at the state level overwhelmingly. And that's why I think it is a very fair proposal for the state level and something I support. I think Assemblyman Godfrey's been right all along on that, and I believe in a single-payer model nationally. I think it's hard to do at the local level with the legal construct.
Taking the federal government off the hook and the implication that would have for Medicaid, which is a social contract that goes back decades.
It's an excellent question. Again, since this idea has not been given any serious consideration, you're sort of farther down the analytical road than I am. I think that, but it begs a bigger question in anything we do. Right now, job one is human lives. If 1.6 million people are going to lose their health care, we're going to lose people's lives. You know, lives will be lost. We're going to have a horrible situation for families. We're going to have to figure out every practical thing we can do to help. I think you're right. There's a bigger issue going on, which is what is the nature of entitlements in America and the safety net. But boy, if you look at the polling, it's stunning. I mean, you know, now Obamacare is suddenly popular, and we know what people feel about Social Security. I think the American people have spoken that they do believe in a strong safety net. They do believe in trying to guarantee families a decent life. I actually think it's trending more in that direction. So, you know, if we ever got to such a day, we would have to consider those ramifications, but we're nowhere near that right now. Yeah.
So Mayor, going back to the question of the derailment, do you ever consider sort of the symbolic value of your presence that to New Yorkers seeing the mayor there and talking about it and reassuring them or speaking about the crisis more, that has value other than the sort of calculation you went through?
Of course, but it still has to be considered with everything else. You know, I've said, and I mean it, I'm going to put, you know, thank God now that mayoral control is out of the way and the healthcare fight is not out of the way. We're going to be pursuing that intensely in July. But at least mayoral control is out of the way. You know, that's going to open up more space, as we talked about earlier, for a lot of things. I'm going to be putting more time and energy into the subways. The good news is, as I mentioned, the things that have changed in the last week are really, you know, promising. But I'll be out there. I will be out there seeing for myself. I'll be out there speaking up for New Yorkers, and I'll be out there pushing for a strong plan to address the subway problem. The way you put it, though, I think really is telling. I don't mean about you, but about the whole equation. Of course, a leader has to think about the symbolism of everything we do. But I would argue we cannot get lost in the question of symbolism. I think too many leaders have spent, you know, a career doing symbolism without substance. And I need to think about both. I got to walk and chew gum. I got to make sure that big things like mayoral control and the right to have health insurance are being attended to in every way possible. And I also have to think about the symbolic role I have as mayor. I think it's easy to show up at something. I don't think it's the same thing as making anything better, right? If you can show up and make something better, that's worth it. And I think, for example, after two very painful situations, the one in Times Square and the one in Chelsea, it was absolutely necessary to go and update people and explain what we were doing and showing them that they were safe and the way we were going to handle the situation. And I could mention other ones like that. But this, to me, did not equate with those kind of situations. Yes?
Independently from your decision not to go to the site, why did you not take questions about the incident that day?
It's, look, a matter of, again, the things that we are focused on at any given moment. We're making decisions about time and energy all the time and where to focus it. This week was a very unusual week. Two you know, supernova issues proceeding simultaneously for the beginning of the week, and then it just evolved to mayoral control, which is vast unto itself and has been touch and go until hours ago. So I'm going to put my energy where I think makes sense. When I think it is time to stop and take questions, I'm going to do it. We've obviously set for all of you some expectations about what we're going to do on any week, and then others times when we can do more. This was a week to focus on the nuts and bolts. There was I cannot even begin to describe how many moving parts were going into this process. I mentioned numerous conversations with the governor, with the speaker, with Leader Flanagan, with you know, others up there in Albany, and then all the other people who are trying to help the equation from outside. As I mentioned, all the folks advocating for mayoral control. That's what I was singularly focused on. See if there's anything else before we shut down.
This atmosphere of this collaboration that kind of was burnished by the crisis, does that make you optimistic about governing in general in New York State now more than when you were going into it and it was looking like it was so last minute?
Look, I think any time people cooperate, it's good, and it opens up a door for more cooperation. And I do, I'm a very proud Democrat, I'm a proud progressive, but I also really believe in bipartisanship, which I've experienced a lot as a mayor with my fellow mayors, and which we're trying to foster in Washington on the health care bill. So yeah, it was good to see some bipartisanship in Albany. It was good to see open and productive conversation. It was there was definitely some stripping away of perhaps some stereotypes, particularly for Leader Flanagan and I, to have a consistent dialogue and really hear each other more, I think was helpful. And again, he handled it in a very respectful and open manner. That's good. I think, you always have to be careful in any situation to read too much into it, but sure, it's a good sign, certainly a good sign.
Mr. Mayor, the Republican field for the mayoral race narrowed pretty dramatically yesterday.
That is dramatic.
I'm wondering
That's a 50% reduction, is that right? No, so.
if you would like to comment at all on Assemblywoman Maliotakis as your primary challenger, and does this change anything about your strategy?
Well, first of all, Assemblywoman Maliotakis is now de facto the Republican nominee, so I congratulate her for that. Look, the Assembly member and I have real differences. She made clear the other day she voted for Donald Trump. That puts her at odds with the vast majority of New Yorkers. She has intensely supported the Trump administration's immigration policies, which again I think is not the position of most New Yorkers, and I think is a mistake. And she has not said whether she agrees with the Senate health care bill, which would take away health insurance from over 1 million New Yorkers. So we have real differences. Those will all be talked about in the campaign. I'm going to focus on what we've achieved. I'm going to focus on pre-K and the amount of affordable housing we've created and the drop in crime, the reduction in stop and frisk. These are the things I think people really want to talk about. And I'm going to talk about how we're going to build on all that with things like 3K, for example. But we have profound differences that obviously align to our party identities. And that's what an election is all about, to have that conversation.
Mr. Mayor, the $1 billion that the governor announced this morning for the MTA, he said just before this press conference that money will not be put into the state until next year's budget. There's a lot of time between now and then.
Sure.
Does that give you pause? And are you ready to consider any other possible funding streams for the MTA, congestion pricing? You mentioned like a version of the millionaire's tax the other day on the radio. Are you working on anything like that that could help the city raise revenue?
Many pieces to your question. Let me try and address them. And if I miss, you will tell me. The million being in the next budget is normal. That's the budget cycle. Billion, I'm sorry. Thank you. That's even more. The billion being in the next budget is the normal state budget cycle. I've said repeatedly the resources the MTA has right now can be better used to address the current crisis. But I commend the governor for adding the $1 billion for sure. Governor said it today. I've said it before. Congestion pricing is not going to move in Albany with the current political configuration. It's just not. There's times when I am definitive that something cannot happen politically, other times where I think there's room for change and movement. This ain't one of them. So that's a non-starter. On the question of, what was the other piece, I'm sorry?
So congestion
On the Genaris proposal, right?
the millionaires.
Yeah. Look, I think it's an interesting proposal. I think it's worth consideration. But again, want to be consistent. The first thing to do is try and figure out how to take the very large MTA budget and use it to greater effect for the subways and refocus the energies on the subways. But if you said long-term, where would we get more revenue for the future? I think that's a proposal worth looking at. Okay, last call, going once. Yes. You are so active today, Bob.
Councilman Crowley and Councilman Torres, after the London fire, said they want to have hearings to take a look in light of the lessons learned from that. In that case, public housing called social housing. Activists were talking about the lack of maintenance of the facility. Are you concerned about, Mancha, I know that you've been a champion of it,
Are you concerned when you see something like that, this presents an opportunity for us to take another look at, especially in some of the combustible units?
Sure.
I know that there are 5- and 6-story units that are indeed combustible.
A couple of things. I think we have a very different situation than London. I really do. I think New York City's building code has been superior. I think we have more fire retardant buildings for a lot of reasons. Commissioner Nigro, right after the fire, was quick to tell me that, you know, there's a very different reality here. But that being said, of course we're going to look at everything, and we should. And I certainly am very comfortable with hearings. I think the more we look at an issue like this, the better. But the good news about New York City is, in general, we have some of the strongest health and safety laws of any locality, not only in the country, but in the world. If we have to add to them, we'll be ready to do so. Thanks, everyone.
Fourth of July plans?
Undetermined.